All right. Got a good number of you today. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're located. Thanks for taking some time out to discuss cybersecurity and see some of the information that we've prepared for you. My name's Tim Bakker. I'm a solutions architect here at ProviNET Solutions. And today we're going to talk about some trends and statistics from the past year, and also spend some time at a high level about how organizations can reduce their risk and improve their overall cybersecurity. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A chat. We'll do our best to answer them along the way, as well as we've tried to carve out a little time at the end to address any questions that you have. I kind of want to start off and talk about taking a step back in time and how IT support has really shifted pretty dramatically over the past 10 years. When we think about some of the differences that our organization and how our organizations operate, versus 5 or 10 years ago, there's a pretty big shift on where our users are located. Most of them today work, remotely or in a hybrid type environment. So they're much more dispersed. As such, our data is also dispersed. It's not necessarily all in our server rooms. It's probably spread across, our server rooms as well as in the cloud and, other locations. Traditionally, IT's primary concern was maintaining uptime, and availability of that data. Our security primarily consisted of a firewall, maybe antivirus, server backups and a spam filter maybe. But times have changed. Today, cybersecurity is of equal, perhaps even greater importance than uptime. Cyber theft has exploded over the past few years, and securing our environments has gotten much more difficult because our users are no longer centralized, and neither is our applications and our data. So today we're kind of going to look at some of the cybercrime statistics over the past year, and again, touch on some of those concepts for managing those risks. I've often heard companies say things like, we're too small to be a target, or we don't have data that's valuable. And quite honestly, those are false statements. Cyber criminals are indiscriminate. They're very opportunistic, and their attacks affect companies of all sizes. We mainly only hear of the very large organizations like United Health or Ascension, hospitals recently. Those are the ones that we hear in the news, but there's many small, medium businesses that get attacked every day, and we simply just don't hear about them. About a third of ransomware events happen to small businesses with less than 100 employees. And often these businesses, they lack tools and processes and the people to protect their environments. There was a study in 2019 that said that nearly 60% of small businesses closed doors within 6 months of a cyber attack. And so securing those environments is just as important for small businesses as it is for large enterprises. To the cyber criminals, all of that data is valuable. They can use that to carry out additional attacks. They can sell that information on the dark web. They can use it, in ransomware to extort your business, to try to get back up and running. Or oftentimes they'll use it kind of for any combination of those models, whatever lends itself as being accessible and convenient. In some shape or form, the cyber criminals can use your data for their financial gain. Their motivation is financial. Most people recognize that pretty easily, but what we don't always think about is that these criminals are organized crime. They operate, in various places throughout the world, and it's very lucrative. In 2023, the known ransomware payments surpassed $1 billion for, again, that was ransomware alone. There's probably many instances of companies that did not report, and so that number is much higher. These criminals, they can make that money through several different methods. Some of them are initial access brokers, so their job is to gain the initial access into the environments, and then they'll either pass that along to other criminals in their organization to actually try to go further into your systems and find other ways to exfiltrate data. They may also just gain initial access, document that, and then sell lists on the dark web to other threat actors. There's ransomware. So this is extortion through, oftentimes they'll first exfiltrate your data, so they'll gain access, and they'll copy any data that they can off to a remote location that they control. And then once that's done, they'll encrypt your systems. So now they can extort you to pay a ransom to unencrypt your systems, or even if you just restore from backups and do not pay them that ransom, they can still extort you to delete and keep your information confidential. Some cyber criminals, their job is to create tools and sell that to other cyber criminals. So similar to how we have our Microsoft 365 subscriptions, and we subscribe to those on a monthly basis. Well, cyber criminals have adopted that same model, and they have a ransomware as a service where a threat actor can pay as little as $150 a month and gain access to all kinds of tools that they can use in their craft. There's theft of personal and financial information. Again, these get compiled and sold on the dark web. Those prices are relatively inexpensive. Lists of 10,000 people can sell for as little as $500 and upwards to the tens of $1,000s, depending on what data that they contain. These organizations, they are much like our organizations. They have customer service departments, they have research and development departments, they have payment processing where they will use their capabilities to facilitate payments for these ransomware. And not only do they do that payment processing for themselves, but they also outsource, or they also provide that service to smaller cyber criminals as well. And the cost of these data breaches has grown substantially. 2023, again, globally, the average ransomware payment was 3.3 million for companies with less than 500 employees. The United States, that number is often 2 to 3 times higher. Overall, all organization sizes in 2023, the average ransomware cost was in the 9.2 billion, or I'm sorry, 9.2 million dollar range. And the cost of these breaches isn't just simply paying the ransom. There's a number of additional costs that are included in that number. So things like the ransom itself, but then the remediation effort to bring in your IT teams, often specialized IT teams for incident response. Oftentimes there's legal costs or even public relations costs associated, depending on the scale of the incident. There's downtime that your employees can't work, so there's operational loss. And oftentimes, our customers or vendors, when they hear of a breach, it can create fear among them. So we can lose customers, and we lose reputation with even prospect clients. There may be costs to credit reporting subscriptions for monitoring for customers or vendors or stakeholders that information was breached. And possibly for some regulated industries, there can be government fines as well. When we look at the industry of targets, healthcare continues to be number one. There's good reason for this. One is that healthcare has a large attack surface. Um, there's a need in healthcare to share data um, with a lot of different providers. There's lots of integrations that healthcare does between doctors and patients and even other healthcare providers. Healthcare also holds, a lot of valuable data to these threat actors. So things such as names, addresses, social security numbers, uh, oftentimes payment information, and then quite simply just the quantity of data too that healthcare has makes it a lucrative target. Overall, I would say the other top five, financial, pharmaceuticals, energy, um, industrial is on the top 5 year. Those have stayed pretty much the same over the past few years. Um, that said, the industrial or manufacturing environments tend to be an increased target and have moved up into the top five this past year. A lot of that is because they have a lot of legacy systems that might be hard to replace, and they are more likely often to, in a ransomware event, to pay something because it's very hard for them to restore those systems, and it's very critical that they get those systems back online in many cases. Another kind of discouraging trend I think is that our discovery of a breach takes too long. So in 2023, the average time for organizations to discover that they were breached is over 6 months. It's beyond 200 days. Um, Oftentimes they don't realize this until all the damage has largely been done. The threat actors, they work pretty quickly and methodically. One of our cybersecurity partners reported an average of 83 minutes is the amount of time that it takes a threat actor from the time they get initial access into your environment to the time that they start trying to move laterally or expand their attack within your environment. Um, that's only 83 minutes. Much of the time they're looking to figure out where they are in that time frame. So they may get initial access and they don't know at that point if they're just a regular user that has very defined access, or if they have some sort of administrative rights. So they're spending that time figuring out where they are in the network, what sort of access that they have, and then from there they'll continue to expand the attack. Um, but that time frame to really control that is not quite an hour and a half to get in front of it. Um, in ransomware events, once they get in, their first thing, once they figure out where they are in the network and what access they have, is they're going to try to exfiltrate as much data as possible, and then ultimately they'll reveal themselves by encrypting the systems. But at that point they've gotten everything that they desire, and that often can take months. They're very patient and methodical and trying to expand their attack as they go along. um, af- After the systems have been encrypted, that that's where they begin the extortion techniques of ransom payments for decrypting systems, or in exchange for, if you restore from backup, then that's fine. But then, now they've introduced the well, if you don't pay us this ransom, then we're going to share your information on the dark web. And so oftentimes that may cause organizations to consider those payments. A third tactic that has been a little bit more recent is the threat of doing additional attacks if you fail to pay the ransom. So these might be like uh, denial of service attacks, or going beyond that and reaching out to your customers and vendors directly to let them know. For too many organizations, it this goes undiscovered too long, and the more quickly that we can detect the incident and contain that threat, the lower our exposure is going to be, and also the lower the remediation costs are going to be. This chart kind of looks at different data breach types and their causes. So, kind of going to the right, we talk about like the frequency of these types of attacks and how often they occur. And then going up on the scale talks about um, kind of the cost associated with each type of those attacks. So the most frequent one that we see a lot is email based what I would call categorize as like an identity based attack. So um, this trend has grown quite a bit over the past few years. Um, and really a lot of the focus over the past year has kind of shifted to uh, using stolen user credentials against cloud service logins as well as VPN portals. So this starts oftentimes with a phishing attempt that looks to trick a recipient into clicking on a link where they may you know log into a fake website that gives up their user credentials and provides initial access. It could be some sort of business email compromise. So this is, again, it could be that you're giving up credentials, or it could be that you're just responding to a request for, updating payment information or, you know, uh, paying a fake invoice or providing additional information that maybe you wouldn't want to send, an untrusted party. Often these are updating payment information, but they could be as simple as providing a customer or a vendor list. Much less prevalent, but the most costly on this list is the malicious insider. And again, insider attacks, they can be intentional or unintentional, but essentially they can do a lot of harm because these individuals have a lot of knowledge and access to our systems oftentimes, and again, intentionally or unintentionally, by installing applications that aren't company approved, or by intentionally trying to disrupt our operations. Those can be very costly to detect and remediate. So all of that information is pretty scary. It poses a very significant risk to the organizations and all of our stakeholders. There's many different organizations across many different industries on this call today, and so um, you know, all of us have different reasons or different needs within that cybersecurity journey, but we all share a common risk. Today, we increasingly have some better tools at our disposal to manage that risk. But I think the first thing that we all need to recognize is that cybersecurity is a team sport. It's not something that just your IT department can accomplish alone for the organization. It really starts with, guidance and policy from, the executive leadership of the organization. It requires overall management by, the IT staff for your organization. Um, and it requires, acceptance and adherence from our employees. And more commonly today too, it requires some expertise from trusted outside vendors as well. In many cases, it will require additional budget to address what we define as you know our our risks and our goals, and that is going to vary quite a bit by an organization's need and their risk tolerance. But for organizations that are spending roughly the same on IT today as they were, 5 years ago. They may want to reevaluate what their risk posture is there. We're going to touch today on kind of the six functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So the NIST framework is one of several different frameworks out there. NIST works really well. There's another one called CIS. framework. They're both great tools for evaluating cybersecurity. They'll cover similar territory, and they're really helpful for um, developing the cybersecurity maturity within any business. So with these six functions, we'll kind of do a broad overview of to help your organization begin a conversation on cybersecurity and what's involved. I hope in future webinars that we can kind of dive into each one of these functions more specifically and a little bit deeper. So the first one is governance. Like I said, it really starts with executive leadership and key stakeholders in the organization. There's a couple goals here. Um, First thing is we need to define what the risk is for our organization and what our tolerance is to it. Perhaps we may even have some contractual, legal, or regulatory requirements that we have to adhere to. Once we kind of have defined that risk, there's a lot of other risks that an organization may have, and so we need to kind of prioritize where cybersecurity risk falls within the other risks for the organization. Beyond that, evaluating what current policies and procedures and training that we provide our employees, and where we fall with that. And then we want to make sure that we're assigning uh, cybersecurity responsibilities to various roles and departments within the organization to make sure that you know every employee kind of knows what their responsibility is there for cybersecurity. Governance identifies the risks and the needs for the organization. It's creating that foundation, for evaluating, kind of the necessary, policies, procedures, also any future tools or vendors, and, subsequent framework functions. After governance, we move on to identifying. So um, we need to identify, what we need to protect. We also need to document that. So really a big piece of this is, assets, and assets include, user accounts, servers, workstations, vendors, any sort of IT related asset should be documented. And there's tools out there that can do this, but this can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that gets updated regularly. Um, After that, we need to assess each asset to determine, what risks are associated with that, and what protections do we have in place for them. And we want to start with, what's our most sensitive and what's our most business critical. What areas do we have the most exposure in? That's where we want to start. That will help us identify, areas of focus, potential gaps that we have in securing those assets. And that inventory, quite honestly, is useful for evaluating, different IT tools that we may want, in our response and recovery functions that we'll talk here in a minute about. The next function is protection. So obviously we must protect our information, and there's um, a lot of different pieces and tools out there depending on the needs and maturity level of the organization. But some basic ones that can sometimes get overlooked, is onboarding and offboarding policies. Do we have an effective and efficient process to make sure that we're, adding and removing new and terminated users on a timely basis? Are we making sure that we're giving them the appropriate access? Um, Another idea, is least privilege access. So that's the idea of, we want to give employees access to what they need, but we don't want to give them access to more than what they need. So that way, that limits our exposure. So that, if that account is compromised, then um, we're not exposing all data. We're just exposing the data that that user needed to perform their job. Multi-factor authentication. Most all vendors now provide some sort of MFA option as part of their base offering. And you're probably used to using that for email, but what about other external applications that you have, like VPN connections or HR and payroll systems, electronic health records or CRM applications? Um, are you confident that they're protected? And if you're not using MFA at all, why not? It's very effective at reducing the risk of compromise. Um, and account breaches happen pretty readily for organizations that don't enroll in MFA. Another one that's pretty low cost is security awareness training. Quite honestly, humans are the weakest link in cybersecurity most often. Are we consistently training our employees on knowing what to look for? Are we testing them, on a semi-regular basis to see how likely they are to fall for like a phishing scam? Um, you know, that information helps our employees understand their role in securing the organization. They learn more about what to look for, but it also helps point out to us as managers, you know, what users might need additional help or oversight. Backing up, we need to make sure that we're backing up our data and knowing what our recovery point objective, which means how much data will be lost. If I'm backing up once a day, at 11 p.m. at night, and I had a cyber incident or hardware failure, I potentially, could lose up to 24 hours of data um, if that incident happened, at 10 p.m. before the next backup ran. I also want to understand what my recovery time objective is. So, based off of what my systems are, how long will it take me to get back up and running? Is that, a couple hours? Is it, a couple days? What does that look like? And I want to make sure that any backups that I have are stored, locally and in the cloud, and they're stored in a encrypted state that is disconnected from my main network. So that way, if a ransomware event does um, take effect, then my backups aren't compromised as well. And evaluating, based off of that, is that sufficient for the organization's needs? Some may be perfectly acceptable to have, 3 days where it would take to restore from an event. Others, need to recover much more quickly than that. We want to know generally where our data lives. Data is an asset, and what is it encrypted, both in transport as it, traverses the internet, as well as at rest when it's, sitting on whatever location servers that it's located on. And are we confident that that data is secure if, it's on a mobile device like a laptop or smartphone? What happens if that device is lost or stolen? Are we confident that that data will remain secure? And then simple things like patching, making sure that, we're installing our updates on our systems, whether that be your Windows computer or that be, your Apple iPhone or whatever that device is. Those patches are released pretty regularly, and we want to keep up with those and make sure that they're installed across our organization. Oftentimes, these things are kind of considered table stakes for obtaining cybersecurity um, you know, the insurance companies have really increased their requirements over the past few years as these attacks have increased in uh, frequency as well as cost. The next function is detection. So, earlier we hit on that it's roughly 200 days to detect a breach, and that is simply too long. We need to be much quicker to um, detect and contain that event. Historically, we've had antivirus and endpoint protection software is what it's. Endpoint protection is kind of the term that's used today. It really is a modern antivirus software. And that's been very effective at combating known and unknown malware. But as such, the cyber criminals have really shifted their methods. So today they're commonly using everyday, tools that your IT department would use, things like PowerShell scripts and IP scanning tools. They use that to survey the environment, and then they'll use those scripting languages to exfiltrate and encrypt your data. Since those tools are everyday common occurrences, antivirus software, you know, won't necessarily detect them as being malicious, and so antivirus alone, isn't really sufficient anymore. So how do we enhance our detection capabilities? I think some of the main ones are through the employee education. The idea of see something, say something, training our employees to recognize what may seem out of place, and making sure that they know, who to report it to and how to report it. And quite honestly, encouraging them to do so. Even if it turns out to be nothing. It's better to have 100, false alarm uh, than not to receive any of that feedback at all and then have a major event. An area where I think third-party vendors can really help is what's called a security operations center. So these are cybersecurity professionals that monitor your environment, 24/7, 365 days a year. And their job is to investigate suspicious activity. So they have eyes on your systems, often your cloud environments. And some can even, some will just provide alert to your teams to take action. Others will actually take action on your behalf to, stop and minimize any damage that they see. Things like, locking out user accounts or disabling systems where they see that they may be compromised. This helps to stop, slow, and contain the spread of, anything from a ransomware event to a phishing campaign. And also increasing our logging and centralizing that logging. So, you know, access to uh, key systems like firewalls, servers, things like that, centralizing that logging into a single location that's easily searchable. This really helps us um, look for anomalous activity, as well as it can be helpful when we're doing incident response later on if there isn't, in fact, a breach that we need to look into. The response function really is here to define a plan for the organization, um, and how they're going to address any sort of detected security incident. It involves making a plan and really a starting point, and that is to document contact information for your critical resources. Think of key employees, key vendors, your insurance company, your financial institutions, legal counsel, law enforcement. We want to have this information readily available so that way, if we do have some sort of incident, we have all the information there on who to contact. And really, we want to define um, what those metrics are. What defines a low level incident versus, a critical incident. We want to define, who's responsible inside of this so that everyone kind of knows what the plan is going to be. Leaders are often responsible for communicating with upper management, decision makers, third party stakeholders and media. Technical resources are often responsible for determining what the severity of the incident is, and they work to and then working to contain it. We want to document the incidents. We want to know what kind of attack they were, what systems, users, departments, what assets were impacted for that. We also want to define how the team's going to communicate in in the event of a breach. You know, we may have to consider that, the normal communication methods that we have been compromised. And so we want to set up, an alternative method of which we're going to communicate that would not be seen by the threat actors. We also kind of want to set at a high level how often our team's going to communicate, any sort of status updates and stuff like that. One of the best things that we can do during a incident response is to make sure that everyone has the information and is up to date on accurate information and on a timely basis. So if we set an expectation that, there will be, during the initial phases an update every 2 hours, and then, as we get further along, we may extend that out to 8 hours or one day. We just want to have a clear communication to set expectations ahead of time, because there's a lot of stress when responding to an incident. Um, the goal here is to formalize processes and then work to test and refine and update those plans, with more detailed information as our testing and refinements come to fruition. Ultimately, we want to make sure that, key stakeholders are informed as the incident goes on. We want to make sure that they have accurate information so that they can make the correct decisions during the containment and recovery process. It's also important, I think, to note that many cyber insurance carriers can often help with incident response, meaning that, if you do have an incident, their expectation is for your IT team to contain that incident, but often the time they want to bring their own experts in to help advise through the response plan of, you know, are we going to communicate with the threat actors to negotiate, what sort of forensics that we want to do to understand what was breached, and ultimately understand what potential obligations that we have. And in some cases, depending on the policy, bringing in their incident response team can be required to ensure that, the coverage of your policy remains intact. The last stage is recovery. So, at this point, we've contained the incident, and we're looking to restore our systems and get them back working. We're confident that we've contained it, right? We don't want to start recovering data and systems until we know that the hackers are out. Otherwise, our attempts to recover could be sabotaged. We also want to preserve any evidence that the incident response team may need. Um, you know, Insurance companies or law enforcement may want certain information to better understand the incident. And so whatever we possibly can do to preserve that, we want to do that. That may in some instances, prevent us from, quickly restoring. We want to make sure that, in that restoration process, we know what the requirements are. We want to make sure that we're ensuring the maximum, insurance coverage for the incident. Our incident response plan, will go into action. We want to restore access and data based off of, what's most critical to the business, what's going to have the biggest impact for us restoring operations. And we also want to make sure that we're restoring those systems in a secure manner along the way. Again, communicating to stakeholders along the way to let them know where we're at with that process. But we want to make sure that, those communications are appropriate, that they're correct, and that, if if they need to be approved by any sort of legal counsel or public relations department, that we're going through the proper channels there. And once we get through the recovery, we want to take a step back and we want to review, what did we learn from the event? What in our processes worked? What didn't? What gaps did we learn that we need to address? And then ultimately use that information to go back and update our documentation and our policies, and then plan accordingly to prevent a future incident. So that is the information that we want to share today. There's some resources here that I think are helpful and that I'd recommend that you check out. So much of these statistics today came from a report done by IBM. It's called the Cost of a Data Breach Report for 2023. Similarly, Verizon offers a data breach investigations report every year. These two reports are done annually by both organizations, and they contain a wealth of information on trends and motivations and who's doing what. The two frameworks that I mentioned would be CIS, that's from a nonprofit organization called the Center for Internet Security, and they have a very good practical framework for developing a mature cybersecurity model. And it's not necessarily there's different levels based off of the organization's need. It's a good way to evaluate your environment and then start implementing gradual improvements to your cybersecurity. Similarly, the NIST framework, NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's a government agency. Their framework also has good guidance, and those two very much have overlapping recommendations and controls. It's just kind of how they lay out those processes is a little bit different. Cybersecurity is a journey. There's not necessarily a step one, hey, you have to start here. It's really like looking at the CIS framework and saying, okay, out of all of these things, what can I do most readily? And then, all right, how can I start picking and choosing and knocking off additional items, as time, budget, complexity allows us to improve those.